The chances of you encountering a villain or antagonist in the contents of a video game story are pretty high. When the role is written poorly, it's like, but when it's done right, it's like. A villain doesn't necessarily have to be the big bad. Think of choices like Bowser or Ganon. These guys are iconic in that they're always the ultimate obstacle for these games' heroes to overcome. But perhaps they aren't the best performers in their role when you get picky about what truly makes a great villain. Handsome Jack doesn't take long in Borderlands 2 to start planting the seed of hatred for his witty and cocky attitude on the player.
Okay, how about this? Lady, I don't even know what to call you. You tell me why you look like you headbutted a belt sander, and I'll let all of you go right now.
After experiencing the Joffrey-like distaste for this character over the rest of the game, I can't say that there have been many villains that have inhibited such a negative reaction from me. There have been villains in other games that capture different aspects of the approach Handsome Jack takes to putting such a target on his back, but none have been able to execute on all angles like he was in his story's antagonistic role. To nail your game's villain is also to nail the motivating factor for the player to want to complete the journey it takes to get to that final showdown. Many games fall flat for players right out of the gate because what they're meant to defeat and overcome is either poorly presented or not even presented at all. In this video, I'll be collecting some of the best villains to ever grace a game's antagonistic role and seeing what makes them thrive in their respective stories.
I can't wait.
Sometimes your game's villain doesn't need to be explicitly stated, but you can get a looming sense of who or what they are as your adventure unfolds. GLaDOS never truly shows any blatant aggression towards the robots you play as throughout Portal, but you slowly become more and more offended by what she says and does, as well as recognize hints of malice in how she guides you towards the objectives.
I'll give you credit. I guess you are listening to me. But for the record, you don't have to go that slowly. Waddle over to the elevator and we'll continue the testing.
No compliment isn't followed up by some sort of passive aggressiveness, but even though GLaDOS is constantly berating the player, the fact that there is any connection to be made between the villain and the player at all lets her intentions sneak by you as you start to want to impress who you really should be rebelling against the whole time. Handsome Jack is a bit more evil feeling out of the gate, as opposed to the almost soothing nature in the conversations GLaDOS presents in the first act to Portal. This being said, Jack's villainy is never not coupled with an attempt to relate with the player at the same time. So while he's a bit more blatant in coming off as a villain in comparison to GLaDOS, he still has human traits that ground him into being approachable by the player in ways that let you grow hatred on much deeper levels when he wrongs you.
Oh, jeez. I'm sorry. Thank God. I was so worried you'd killed those bandits before they could murder old Gran. And you know what? Now I don't even have to pay him, so thanks for the help, man. Still gonna kill you, though.
Not to mention just how annoying these characters are. There is just no universe where you get to the end of listening to Handsome Jack and don't want to just... It's that very sense of annoyance that adds another layer to how well these characters execute their roles as antagonists. Sure, GLaDOS is just a character on a screen, but when I think I'm doing well in Portal and get met with...
Remember before when I was talking about smelly garbage standing around being useless? That was a metaphor. I was actually talking about you.
I almost feel insulted myself when it was directed towards the robots you're playing as. When given more reasons to hate a villain beyond the typical obstacle in the form of a character, it provides a sense of personal investment as you relate with the possible anti-hero even if you don't recognize it. Similar to my last video on how games pull your emotions in to tell a better story. While the strength and intimidation of your villain is important, without something unique to set them apart from the rest and how they execute the role, the motivation in completing the game as a whole is rapidly lost. And it's this aspect of GLaDOS and Handsome Jack in their respective games that push the player to surmount the obstacles and overcome each of them. When it comes to embodying the fear and intimidation you would expect a typical villain to exhibit in their story, Sephiroth and his mass destruction of Final Fantasy VII's world stands quite far above the rest. Similar to the Great Handsome Jack, the utter devastation and tragedy that Sephiroth's actions place on the hero's shoulders is felt in the stomach of the player. It's hard to forget the numerous occasions Cloud's strife is thrusted into grief and misery as the friends, family, and world around him are taken from him. In nearly every scenario, the smoking gun leads back to Sephiroth. Now, so far, Sephiroth doesn't sound very unique, possessing rather typical villain traits and motivations. The difference is within the execution that leads to this point of him being the big bad. The reason Sephiroth can set himself apart as a villain like Handsome Jack is able to is because how each of their most devastating actions are weaved into the story. When Sephiroth kills Aerith, it just sucks, and you feel it. Same thing with Handsome Jack's fast one he pulls with killing Roland when the heroes are most vulnerable. It's the sense of being truly wronged, even as the player. You almost don't want to go on like how I felt after the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. The characters killed in these scenarios aren't coming back, and you'll have to get used to it if it means continuing to make steps toward revenge. The best villains leave lasting impressions and tragedy that, even when surmounted, don't go away. The day is won, but Aerith is dead. The day is won, but Roland is dead. Those conquered villains are victorious in defeat because the heroes still feel defeated when victorious. For a game to nail its antagonistic role means that it likely nails the motivation aspect of what drives the player to complete the game. Each new area you get to, you hope this is the one where you finally get to get revenge on Sephiroth, shut GLaDOS up, or, derivative of the video's title, finally gut the boastful and cocky Handsome Jack. Compare these examples to a character like Ganondorf. He's intimidating and frightening in all of his entries, but you just don't hear from him until he's suddenly the final boss. Breath of the Wild took a refreshing new approach to how he's integrated into the story, but it still doesn't stack up to any of the previously mentioned villains. All of them have that it factor that sets them apart from typical villains in storytelling and makes them unique. As long as your antagonist is presented in the form of a simple obstacle, the player will undoubtedly lose interest. When you make the villain the deepest and most interesting to dissect character in the story, it does wonders to all the other aspects that shape the story as a whole. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the rest of my channel and consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it really helps me out. Thank you.